Mike, and I will introduce you. You can introduce yourself as well, obviously, and I think yeah, we'll just play it by ear. Just enjoy it, Mike. I think it's
I
important
will
thing.
enjoy it.
So,
And I see the people on screen? Yeah, on cameras.
yeah. I'm gonna mute all and just
Yeah.
ask them to mute so we can start properly. So there we go. Morning, Derek. Morning, Podreg. Morning, Con. Morning, Henry. Morning, Billy.
Good
Morning,
morning.
everybody. Thank you for joining. Thank you for joining. If you've just joined, if you could mute, please, that would be great. I don't know if that's no, Rosalind's not muted. Let's have a look. Let's mute. There we go. Fantastic. That's a bit quieter. Perfect. There we are.
Yeah. Morning, Derek. I saw your email to Rethinking Capital.
So there you go. I don't know if Derek's frozen, maybe. I don't know, but
He's
yeah,
frozen.
frozen. Yeah. And morning, Aaron. If this is the Aaron I know and love, and maybe he's dialing in from the east coast of the States. So I don't know if he's going to unveil himself to all, whether he's still got his pajamas on. I don't know, but we'll have to.
Guilty as charged. I don't think I want you to throw up your lunch. So
It's so early for you. You haven't even brushed your hair, have you? So that's fine. Well, I get that. Well, that's good. Great to hear that you've joined, Aaron, and great to see you. Okay, it's 10:32. I will monitor the lobby, and as usual, we will get going. We are recording, so thumbs up, Henry, Billy, Con, Derek, everybody. We're recording. I take great pleasure in introducing Mike Clark. Most of you, I think, will know Mike, but I will ask him to introduce himself. And then we're having an in-conversation with him, and we have some questions to ask him. Obviously, we'll open up the chat room. If you want to raise any points or ask any questions in the chat room, please do. But I do want this to be interactive. If you want to challenge Mike, agree with Mike, disagree with Mike, then raise a hand, and no doubt you can all chip in and agree or disagree. But I hope you really enjoy the
session. I'd be very disappointed if Mr. Keating, disguised as Elfbest, doesn't challenge, because I know he's very good at disagreeing with himself.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Sorry, using my daughter's computer again this morning.
But it works
and I've
very
never
well.
figured out how to change the attribution on it.
There you go. Don't worry, it's fine. It's great to see you, Con. Thank you for joining. And great to see Henry. Henry, you look very smart, by the way, with your cravat. So thumbs up from Henry, which is great. Mike, in case somebody doesn't know who you are, could you please introduce yourself? What's your name? Where do you come from? And then we'll crack on with the questions, I guess. But
okay, Steve, thanks. Yeah, thanks. So Mike Clark, sitting at home, often work from home in a very cold Oxfordshire. The frost is disappearing from the lawn and the bird feeder. Actuary, sometimes describe myself, possibly relevant for this conversation, as a financial system climate activist on the inside. Have spent a lot of time on risk, and really just hope that what I do is interesting. Picking up Steve's point, very open to challenge. There's so much going on that I'd love to be a useful resource, if you can see it that way. I don't know, I've got much more to say. 10 grandchildren, that'll do.
Wow, 10 grandchildren. I've only got one, so you're way ahead of me, but there we go. Well, thanks for that introduction, Mike. So the first question, let's get straight down to it. Obviously, we wanted to make sure that we're going to have a wide and varied range of questions. The first question is about you being an actuary. Obviously, the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries has recently published the Planetary Solvency view or report. Allegedly, some people call it planetary insolvency. So, Mike, A, what is planetary solvency, and B, why would it be called planetary insolvency? Do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, okay. I mean, put it in context. We've produced, so this we is my profession. I have multiple we's. This is our profession. It's probably the sort of fourth or so report we've published over recent years. A couple ago, we did the Emperor's New Climate Scenarios. We'll probably get onto climate scenarios in this conversation. Then we did Climate Scorpion last year. Planetary solvency is what it says on the tin. it's really trying to apply sort of actuarial risk insurance techniques to the earth and saying we have a problem. We don't have a global risk regulator. We've got lots of national risk regulators and they're rather behind the curve. So the idea is that we need to look at climate change as a sort of systemic risk problem. And that's what it does. So insolvency is the sort of jokey title. And I am told that some people read it behind the sofa because it has that sort of effect on people. And we're really trying to, no, not we, I am really trying, others may as well, trying to bring together societal risk and systemic risk, which are very different. So one theme for this conversation is, and I'm a climate change geek, so we are trying to solve a systemic societal risk problem with idiosyncratic financial risk tools, and that may frame some of my later comments. So if you've not read Planetary Solvency, do at least read the exec summary. And if there are ways in marketing mode, he said, you know, please share it with your networks, because we are so off the pace and rather frightened of talking about the topic because it is so daunting. I think this gives momentum to others who sort of sit in the same part of the world as me.
Right, and that report is readily available on the.
Yeah. And if anybody can't find it, in 60 seconds, just ping me an email and I'll send it to you.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. All right. So that's great, and maybe by the close of this, we can maybe put it in the chat as well. But somebody might look it up because we have lots and lots of very helpful chaps and ladies on here, so that's good. Okay. Climate scenario modelling. You've been quite critical of climate scenario modelling. Firstly, why is that? Why have you been critical of climate scenario modelling, Mike?
I think quite is generous. I think I'd probably say very. It's been a helpful step on the path, but if you give climate scenario modelling finance to a bunch of economists, they'll tend to model what they can and ignore what they can't and just sort of wave their hands. With a good colleague, Mark Cliff, who some of you will know, over 3 years ago now, we set up a little thing called the Real World Climates Initiative. We meet every 2 months, next meeting next month. Again, ping an email if you haven't got an invite and want one. We realised, and Mark in particular is very good on scenarios, that finance was being misled. As I put it, finance is sort of being bamboozled by economics. Just realizing this is being recorded, I'm just going to say the next bit slightly slowly. But about 3 years ago, we had a meeting with the Bank of England. We pointed out that the modelling missed out quite a lot. We were basically patted on the head, told to go away. The modelling would be so much better in 6 months. And it's fair to say that over the last year, NGFS, the Network for Greening the Financial System, have sort of agreed with this, if I can put it that way. They've got to highlight that the uncertainty that we know exists in climate science is hard to bring across to finance. So that's the critique. And some of you who work in the UK pension sector have hopefully not had pension funds who publish things like, this is a public document, at 4 degrees, this pension fund is going to lose 60 bips. I mean, at 4 degrees, most things have disappeared. So there's been a pickup in the UK investment consulting industry's work, which we trust central banks, we trust their modelling. But finance is not economics. We may get to Rachel Reeves on that one and GDP. Finance is not economics. And so arising out of this, USS went through 2 iterations of modelling with one of the standard market advisors. After 2 iterations, they decided it was not decision useful, which is the polite term for other adjectives. And they commissioned the University of Exeter, where I happen to be a visiting fellow, together with Mark Cliff and 3 people from Exeter, And we wrote No Time to Lose, which brings corporate narrative scenarios to the UK pension sector. And I can just say, breaking news this morning, another group I'm working with signed off some narrative climate scenarios for insurance. I won't continue speaking for too long on that, but if Steve's got a question later on that, we can tell you what might happen in the insurance sector with narrative scenarios. I think that'll do for now, Steve.
Okay, I mean, my question on that, just rewinding slightly, was why were there glaring gaps? Was it just poor research, poor understanding? Why were the sort of Bank of England or their advisors so poor, I guess, what you're saying,
well,
in their study? I mean,
can you model stranded labour, tipping points, market prices? If you could model market prices, we'd all have retired. So there's lots of things you can't model. And so, yes, it was the best they could do. We accept that. But the critical thing is people take the modeling too much at face value and believe the numbers. And the numbers have large error bars around them. So I would argue there is a sense of complacency because sort of people would like to believe the output. I'll give you a story. An individual who will remain nameless said some years ago, working for one of the better advisors, Mike, the trouble with these scenarios are my best clients make the best assumptions as input and are so scared by the output they can't talk about it. So maybe that sort of illuminates the problem that, you know, finance does risk, finance love models, uncertainty is tricky around that mindset. So you really have to separate the judgment, the precautionary principle, once you've got the numbers. That's really what it boils down to, because I mean, it's almost a lead into something we may talk about. You know, modern portfolio says risk is the volatility of market prices. Well, there's not a lot of future risk in the volatility of market prices today. I mean, there's a whole risk conversation that we may explore today, especially there's some good questions from the attendees.
Yeah, well, Con's got a question. Con, do you want to sort of unmute and fire away?
Okay. Thanks, Steve. Mike, we've spent an awful lot of money and done an awful lot of investment on the basis of trying to limit the increase in global temperature. And we failed spectacularly.
Agreed.
So the question becomes, at what point should we actually recognize that climate change is inevitable and begin investing for that circumstance?
Several thoughts come to mind. I'll start with a little piece I'm writing. A transition mindset does climate due diligence. So let me try and expand on that. Finance, I suggest, is basically three players: investors, insurance, and banking. Investors split into very different tribes: asset owners, investment managers. And the problem is that our sort of risk theology is too narrow. So if we do investors, I've just had a little poke at MPT. A few people realize that the third word is theory. So we can sort of unpick MPT. I strongly recommend, I'm not on commission, but John Lekumnik is a good friend of mine, Moving Beyond Modern Portfolio Theory, which introduces such lovely phrases as explosive materiality. That's insurers. Insurance I've just talked about. Insurance will have been comfortable, I guess, with the UK CBES exercise, Climate Benefit Exploratory Scenarios. The work I referred to, the scenarios, try to put the phrase is probably going to be strategic adaptation at the centre of the insurance world. Adaptation is clearly central to the insurance business model. annual repricing, as you'll know better than me, Con, gets in the way. So we need the insurance sector to adopt strategic adaptation, or whatever local phrase is preferable, and make it clear that will only work if government policy does mitigation. On the banking side, and there's probably people who can correct me if I get this wrong, I recently discovered when I was asked to speak at a trade finance event, and I said to the inviter, "You're mad, I know nothing about trade finance." She said, "That's the point." That trade finance capital requirements for banks go as follows. I've just lent money to UConn. The capital requirements are based on two things: your credit rating, which is clearly exemplary, and the resilience of the contract between us. The capital requirements I have to hold have no interest in what you are financing. You could be shipping oil, you could be shipping solar panels, but financial regulation doesn't care. So the world I'm in is trying to develop a transition mindset, which I'll say slightly naughtily with Steve. That was originally the title for this topic, but he thought it wasn't sexy enough. So a transition mindset is at the heart of my answer to your question. Are you going to follow up?
No, that's fine. I understand where you're at.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much indeed. The last part of that particular question about the climate scenario modeling was, what do we need to do instead, Mike? What is that? I suppose that's like a magic wand part of the question, isn't it? But what do we need to do instead? What does better or best look like?
Well, I think in a sense, Con's question gets to the heart of it. We need to do a lot of rethinking. I'm hoping that tomorrow one or two of the attendees at this event will sort of think slightly differently about this stuff. We have a risk governance problem before we have a financial risk problem. I helped build GFANZ, we might get onto that. We've seen GFANZ and its children falling apart. Back then, I assumed that financial risk and societal risk are the same. Anybody who's nerdy enough to understand Article 2.1c of the Paris Agreement, which talks about financial flows, will realize the financial flows are not happening, and we need to get deeper, effectively combining the wisdom of IPCC and the FSB in work that I'm involved in. We may pick it up another question. We are trying to improve the management of societal risk, which also frames risks I want to take as a capitalist entrepreneur. So risk is two-edged, as you know. There's bad risks and there's good risks. Interestingly, financial regulation, I'd be interested in comments on this from attendees. Financial regulation tends to treat all risk as bad and therefore inhibits innovation in the real economy, but that's a point to debate. But it seems to me that the Bank of England, well, it's Bank of England said this, the Bank of England is worried about too speedy a transition. Well, that seems 180 degrees wrong. If you do a systemic overlay, I'm happy to say this publicly, when Sam Woods gave his CBEST speech a few years ago, I called it unintentional, to keep the lawyers away, regulatory greenwashing. The modelling was inadequate to make the rather Pollyannish statements that Sam Woods, the PRA chief executive, made. You know, we fundamentally believe our sort of financial risk theologies, and it's a bit like Copernicus and Galileo and the Catholic Church, or Einstein solving problems that Newtonian mechanics couldn't. It's really deep rooted because the way we think. So to your question, yeah, the precautionary principle, investors leaning into the good bits of beta, leaning away from the bad bits of beta. That's where SAA starts, strategic asset allocation. That's probably enough.
Okay, we've got Aaron on, and Aaron, I know you're rubbing your eyes because you're very tired, but you've got a lot of experience in banks and global banking systems. Do you want to comment, Aaron, on that in terms of, what are the banks doing with risk, and what are the banks doing about climate, is this obviously this is a global issue, but are there good banks and bad banks? What's your opinion, Aaron, on that?
So I'm not an expert on banks, but I can comment on what pension funds are doing because I sat on a couple of boards and I wrote this paper recently on, quote unquote emissions. All these pension funds have raced to put on, statements that they're going to go net zero, I think to just appease the press. But when I go into meetings to see what people are actually doing about converting their portfolios, it's shocking. They're doing nothing. So the reason I woke up at 5 is there's so much talk about, being part of a net zero alliance and putting it into their objectives for their pension funds. And then they're making ridiculous statements that we can go net zero and have no effect on people's pension, either the level or the volatility. And I think that is the more frightening comment to me than the comment about going net zero. Is the claims that are being made are A, untestable, so they know they can't be held accountable, and B, that they're just dead wrong and dangerous.
That's a really good point, and I'd like to build on it this way, please, Aaron. I upset a lot of pension funds when I say net zero is a public policy goal. It is not a primary goal for the financial sector.
Yes.
Because to your point, the people you're speaking about make decisions with the financial risk framework, which we'd agree. Net zero is emissions, which is actually a societal metric and everything that comes from it. So when I say BlackRock did everybody a big favor by pulling out of NZAM, the Net Zero Asset Management Initiative, most sort of stewardshipy investors take umbrage, but in fact, it highlights that societal risk, government, non-financial regulators frame markets, we know that, and we finance folk operate within that frame. And whether we're bankers, insurers, or investors, it's financial risk that drives the business model and what's within it. So I think, I'm pleased that you're horrified because that leads to action. But I think we've got to put net zero back in its box, and we might get to transition plans later in this conversation if we have time, Steve.
Yeah, okay, agreed. Before we move on, Peter, you very kindly put in the chat GFANZ. Could you just explain what GFANZ is for the...
Sorry.
What is GFANZ?
So GFANZ is the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. I helped build it before we sold the idea to Carney and he christened it. It emerged out of Paris effectively. The work was led by Steve Waygood at Aviva, who many of you will know. It has had, trying to think of the right verb. There are around 7 children. So there's a net zero insurance, something beginning with A, that collapsed a year or so ago. We now have a thing called FIT in its place. This is the sort of litigation threat. We've got other children, the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, which is one of the wisest. We've got the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative, which is blowing up. We've got the Net Zero Financial Service Providers Alliance, because we ran out of 5-letter acronyms, so we have NZFSPA. There's an interesting conversation about the role of auditors in that, which I can probably go so far on this call, but at some stage I'd probably have to remain silent. So it was basically, and when Carney launched GFANZ at Glasgow, the Glasgow COP, he rather let governments off the hook when he said, we've got $130 trillion ready to go. And governments just said, okay, fine, get on with it. And of course, because price doesn't work, then markets can't solve it, because governments have far more tools than markets, which I think links with something somebody said earlier, that, we haven't made, I think it was Con that said, we've made very little progress. Well, yes, because ultimately markets, financial entities can't solve societal problems. Government solves societal problems.
Indeed, indeed. Rosalind, you got your hand up. Do you want to, before we move on, do you want to make a point or ask a question?
Sorry, I was just unmuting. I'm rather incompetent. Sorry. This was just to follow up, actually, from the point you've just made, Mike, and actually from Aaron's point. One of the things that's been frustrating to me in the pension space is the way in which what governments have done in terms of pension schemes and investment is not tell people they have to invest in certain ways, but tell people they have to tell everyone how they've invested. The legal obligation is not anything to do with whether you actually are investing in a way that deals with the risk of climate change or not.
Totally got the point. So let me.
Sorry, and the point that has always made me really angry about that is that it seems to me that if I was a government, there are lots of things I could do to assist with the challenges of climate change. And it worries me that governments, instead of doing that, are saying, well, we're going to tell other people to tell us what they're doing about it, and then that's us solving the problem. And that has made me furious, because it seems to me it's not even noticing the problems there. It's saying, well, it's nothing to do with us. But coming back to the point you've just made, Mike, obviously the people best placed to do something are surely the government.
Well, my task, I suggest, is to turn your fury into action and increase your agency, he said. Mm-hmm. So 2 things, at least. Just a quick question. Which sort of part of the ferment, so I can speak to your context, Rosalind?
I'm a lawyer. I'm a lawyer.
Excellent.
Lawyer.
Okay. Right. Well, this is excellent, because lawyers are going to help solve the problem by persuading finance that we have a risk governance issue before we have a finance issue. So we're actually relying on you quite a lot. Now, have a look at TSWG. Sorry, there are so many acronyms, but that's life. The Trustee Sustainability Working Group is a group of independent trustees. I am part of that as a sort of, well, I'm not sure how to describe it, because most of the members are independent trustees from, Best Trustees. Actually, Capital Cranfield aren't in there yet, I don't think. But anyway, it is a very powerful group. Bobby Ridaway, the lead of HS Trustees, known to some of you, has got the bit between his teeth. The first thing he did, which I clearly applauded, was to put out a press release applauding planetary solvency. So he's a good friend of mine. They are going to help promote the dialogue, which in some sense we're having today. And I'm going to replay your point as reporting is not risk management, which I think you might agree with. And so therefore, part of this sort of storyline that I hinted at with Con is developing a narrative that others like. They can take bits like explosive materiality or reporting is not risk management and use it in their own domains. So I work pretty closely with Carolyn Saunders, you might know, with Mark Baker at Pinsent, where Carolyn was, and also with Stuart O'Brien, who did a lot of work some years ago on this stuff. Lawyers have got a great role and can actually, round the trustee table, hold investment consultants to account around scenario modelling. So I'm very happy to have an offline conversation about that. Are you a pensions lawyer?
I am, I'm afraid, yes.
Okay, so there's work to be done there, because part of it, I think, is having a is having a persuasive narrative that is more persuasive than the other sides. The other thing I was going to say, and I sometimes forget the second point when I ramble on the first, is that it would be quite interesting if a group of pension funds said something like, "Dear Chancellor, GDP and growth are not the same as a good investment. If you think we might fund Rosebank, you must be joking." So I think one of the ways that we can push back, as it were, to make your point diplomatically and politically, so joking would probably not be in the missive, is to make it clear that not only is, a third runway at Heathrow a bit dodgy, but on the way to GDP and growth, I may be committing money to a stranded asset, Sea Thames Water.
Yes.
USS are a client of mine. So I think there's a conversation to be had where there are some unanswerable truths, and in some ways I sort of offer them, and if they sort of fit into people's particular worldview, please use them.
Yeah.
Does that help?
That's very helpful. Thank you. That's very interesting. It'd be useful to have a conversation about engaging with things like the APL and the investment committee actually on this offline
Yes,
at some point.
I do a lot of pro bono work, but occasionally I say, well, at least give an honorarium, not a fee, if I'm doing real work.
Right, fair enough.
I'm sure we'll try and get you hooked up with Rosalind, Mike. So
Thank you.
Thank
yeah,
you.
she's a very good egg. That's all I can say.
Well, she's clearly, in a sense, if you're annoyed, that's a jolly good start because you want to do something. The challenge is sometimes to work out what to do.
Well, exactly. Whilst we're on the question of the Trustee Stewardship Working Group, I know that sort of come up slightly. That was going to be later on in our journey. Peter Cameron Brown, let me ask you, Peter, if I may, because you just said that you've declared an interest and you're a member of the TSWG. I think collectively, why did you join, and what is it trying to achieve? Just for everybody's benefit, Peter, what do you think?
Right. Well, everybody possibly joins for their own reasons, so I should perhaps just quantify that. My interest was really that I felt that there was quite a lot of discussions which I didn't fully understand about sustainability and incidentally it's the Trustees Sustainability Working Parties. That as a trustee, I was looking for guidance and an understanding of the issues in a practical way, and also felt that in fact we were incurring, trustees were being saddled with reporting requirements which they didn't really understand and weren't adding any value to the trustee process or indeed the investment process, which were obviously at cost to the members of the pension scheme or the sponsors or whoever is meeting the costs. And what was the value to people of these exercises, particularly the implementation statements that we're required to publish each year and put on our websites, and lo and behold, nobody reads them at all. So what is the point of all this exercise? And it was to develop that and to say that in the smaller schemes, these costs can be disproportionate and it can be misleading us, and we don't really know what questions we should be asking our investment advisors, even if we are seeking to invest appropriately for a climate change world.
I think Peter, that speaks excellent to Rosalind's point.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yes, I picked up that point as Rosalind was speaking. But
yeah,
hopefully,
no.
I would say I'm in very much for a learning process at the moment. I did try to make some contributions and might ask Mike a question later on at the last meeting, but unfortunately at that time my voice broke because of I had a coughing fit, which I'm pleased to say hasn't recurred this morning, but it may do. So thanks very much.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Peter. That's really good. Before we move on, just a final word from you then, Mike. What is the TSWG hoping to achieve? And then we can move on.
A voice for people like Peter across the industry, because many of the individuals sit across several schemes. There are lurking in the undergrowth, I think it's the Asset Owner Council, which is secretariated by PRI, which combines two previous groups. But there has been no trustee group, really, that has been prepared to advocate and to have the discussions which Peter has referred to. So I have described them as making a dent in the universe this year. Bobby is pleasantly ambitious, and I think they will also be a forum for conversations like this. I mean, I can upset people quite quickly because I'm actually challenging thinking that they think are facts, whereas in fact they're sort of assumptions. So my challenge working with TSWG has been not to upset individuals, but they're brilliant. I mean, they're going to effectively absorb the bit of this they like. They're focusing on climate for the obvious reason. I mean, you can say in the whole ESG schmozzle that ESG is government's job, largely, and we guys do financial risk. Next. I don't know if we're going to get on, I can't remember if we're going to get onto stewardship, Steve, but stewardship
We're
is
going
another...
to stewardship's the next question, but yeah.
Is it? Oh, right.
Dive straight into stewardship, because that's the next question. But, yeah.
So I'm going to frame this by Rosalind's excellent viewpoint. A lot of resource is wasted on stewardship. Investment managers have persuaded we trustees that they can do it. Proxy voting, engagement, beating at companies. Are you really going to change the Exxon business model? And I say that as somebody who helped get those 3 non-execs on the board a few years ago. Let's start with trustee stewardship. It's capital allocation. It's strategic asset allocation, having regard to strategic risk management. People on this call will be very familiar with some wise pension funds who said, I'm not going to invest in oil and gas because even though I might make money in a year or two, I'm going to lose money in the long term. You know, there is going to be a repricing. We may get on to the repricing of climate risk and financial markets and the excellent academic research which Con will know more about than me. You know, there's going to be repricing if markets are not repricing climate risk. Bit of economics, a supply is ignored, there's no demand, so price formation does not happen. So part of this conversation is reframing stewardship as primarily capital allocation. And actually, I should then lobby for policy and non-financial regulation to make money out of my beta. I sit on investment committee. We're having some fascinating discussions. It's quite a small pot of just over 100 million. We have a fascinating discussion. We have oil and gas exclusions on equity and bonds, and we need to make sure that when we get manager reporting, we split the difference between the return on our portfolio and the index, because the index, we may get onto indices, but obviously the index does not reflect our strategy because we haven't been clever enough to tweak it. So we say, okay, so the difference between our return and the index return is X. Let us split X into our brilliant beta strategy and your manager alpha skill. That conversation, I don't think, happens in many places. So, and you begin to realize you can lobby for policy which will increase the return from the market. I mean, that can lead into the universal owner conversation, but we probably don't want to go there. Well, it's up to you, Steve, but we could, I mean, the universal owner conversation is an interesting one. But basically, most of my working life, 20 years at Russell, beta was a given. It was an outcome. But actually, we can change the outcome because we just get markets to behave differently and give different returns. So realizing that market returns are not a given is part of this rethinking that we've been talking about.
Yep. Okay. No, I get that. We've got quite a few questions, but I want to move on with that, with the sort of agreed questions. Let's talk about transition plans. What's your views on transition plans and how they work in the pensions sector? Let's move on to transition plans.
Right. They're wonderful. The world needs a transition plan. However, with no global governance, we need to migrate down to national transition plans. Chile has a good transition plan. I was in Santiago working with the pensions regulator a year ago. The Marshall Islands has a transition plan. Its first line says, we'd like to stay living here. So transition plans come in different flavors. And you realize when you do it at the national level that it's societal. It's about the way governments and non-financial regulators do their job. And you put financial regulators sort of back in their box because they operate within the frame. A good transition plan will combine societal risk and financial risk. Anybody interested, have a look at the work of CETEX, C-E-T-E-X, which is a bit of LSE Grantham or LSE. And you'll be familiar with the Transition Plan Task Force, which has produced reams of lovely documents. Right, this bit is going to... the pensions regulator has an interest in transition plans. Let me put it that way. Watch this space.
Okay, fine.
And actually, just to say why, because of the point we've had about a lot of pointless reporting, if you got rid of a lot of that, which is partly my fault because I actually helped Opperman with the pensions bill many years ago, if you try and get rid of a lot of that reporting for reporting's sake, a transition plan is actually risk management. So a transition plan is excellent and most pension funds should have one.
Right, I've agreed. Absolutely agreed. Okay. I'm conscious of the time and we've got quite a few questions still to go. You mentioned about BlackRock withdrawing from the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative. I don't think we should need to go back over that.
No.
Climate risk is mispriced in capital markets. Let's talk about that. Do you think
Right.
climate risk is mispriced in capital markets? Then, and
Well,
what's your view?
Yes, we are ignoring it. And economists would say we're ignoring the supply. By definition, that means there's no matching demand. That means price formation and price discovery doesn't work. Next.
Okay, long answer.
I'd actually be interested in Con's view. I mean, I am not someone who's able to sort of scour the academic research, but there's a growing body of research which makes it pretty clear that the fact is true. You then get to what will be the triggers for the repricing. I'm actually helping an FT journalist with a chat this afternoon about a piece she's working for the FT on could climate change precipitate a financial crisis, to which the obvious answer is yes. And in fact, would you care to argue that it won't? I mean, Con, do you have any insight on academic research on this?
No, the majority of research just finds the blindingly obvious. The climate change really is not priced by the markets currently. In fact, over the last year or two, this and ESG more broadly has actually been moving in the other way, in the other direction, not more towards pricing of climate change and related areas, but actually away from it.
Well, I rest my case, Steve. If Con supports something I've said, it's a rare event. Thank you, Con. Let's move on. It's mispriced. So there will be a mispricing. So get on the right side of that. That is very difficult. So here's an example that I often roll out. I'm a trustee. I think passive management is cheap. Gosh, you know, only a few basis points, or possibly even free if they give me the stock lending benefit. Just a minute. So my beneficiaries' savings are flowing through me through, I don't know, BlackRock, LNG, passive global equity into companies like Exxon, and nobody's thinking about it. So passive is not as cheap as people think. In fact, it's very uncheap. So there's a whole load of conversation stimulants that you're managing to draw out of me today.
Mike, you can actually obtain passive fossil-free, passive fully ESG compliant and so on. It's where all of my funds are invested.
Yes, you can. If I responded by saying that's a good start,
They're very
But-
small, but it's a start.
Yeah, I agree. And where that is going, and I need to be careful because this is a friendly chat, so this might turn into a vaguely commercial pitch. What you are addressing is the obvious financial risk of those economic activities. What we need to do across the market is to work out how to do that. So, short break, commercial interlude. I'm on the advisory board of Vizard, VYZRD, which is using AI to do the following. Imagine MSCI World. Imagine every company with MSCI World being repriced with a climate delta. And I'm suggesting that Con, if that was available, might like to invest in it passively, because we're not just doing fossil fuel, but we're looking at steel, we're looking at anything you like, and looking at the business model of the company and its ability, if it's good, to attract more shareholder capital to do the things we want and avoid the other stuff. End of commercial break.
Thank you very much. And really, it's good news that you and Connor are on the same page on quite a bit of this, which is good. Next question is about the personal approach, and actually this crosses over with Billy. Billy's put a comment in the chat about retail investors, about individuals. I suppose individuals as investors, but equally individuals who act as trustees, maybe member-nominated trustees. I don't know, but what's the personal approach to all this? Is there enough chat? Do people really care? Are you, and again, I don't know, Padraig might know the answer to this, or Rosalind may have seen it from various pension funds. Is it still is it taboo? Is it taboo and people just don't think they can make a difference? What's happening on that side of the fence, Mike, on the retail individual side of the fence?
Well, it's difficult. I guess we can divide retail into two. We can do institutional retail, which is perhaps, share action, make my money matter. And the citizen's agent is probably an asset owner I'm trying to enthuse with better thinking. Or we can head across to the IFA wealth management world. So the world of the excellent Julia Dreblow, who some of you will know, SRI Services. And frankly, the situation is even worse there because, they're still picking up modern portfolio theory, which works, right? I wasn't planning to do this, but here's a personal story. I left Russell in 2016 for various reasons, redundancy pay, cashing in shares, my mother dying. I've been living off capital. I'm now 72. I'm living off capital for most of the last, whatever it is, 8 years. I had a decent DC pension pot and decided that since I was running out of capital, I needed some income. So I thought, okay, drawdown. So I entered the drawdown world. I found a wise advisor. I reduced their fee by 2/3 because I wanted no investment advice. I just wanted drawdown as availability. So the advisor helped me find a platform. We narrowed that down. I chose a platform. I then realized, because nobody wants to be accountable, this is almost a Rachel Reeves point. Nobody wants to be accountable for financial advice, understood, because of the risk I'll come back and blame a bad outcome on the advice, which is just clearly, life produces bad outcomes. So I sifted through over 2,000 funds on the platform. I ended up with a lot of global passive equity that was 13 bips, which isn't bad for retail. I then did a large chunk of the Legal and General Future World Fund at 23 bips. Let's just pause for that. I paid 10 bips for a better beta, so that's slightly doing what Con did. I've got some global equity because, I've got to have some equity, cheap. But let's have some passive global equity, but the Future World Fund, which is basically avoiding the stuff that I want to avoid. So I've got better beta for 10 bips, which is probably okay. And some other bits and pieces, but it's sort of, unless you've got somebody like a fine DB trustee or I'm actually a great fan of Cushion. Some of you know Julius Purcell. I'm a great fan of what Cushion are doing. Unless you've got a wise sort of beta fiduciary, you know, you're probably lost. So we'll get there, but the place to start is the people like, you know, Peter on this call, lawyers like Rosalind, to understand that price does not work. I mean, I'm not sure I have time to explore that, but price doesn't work. So you've got to choose the price you want. I mean, choose the frame for price you want. Let me stop there, Steve.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, I mean, obviously we've got Padraig on as well, who's a fantastic journalist, and you know, we need the journalists to spread the word.
Oh yes, no, the Fourth Estate. I don't think I know Padraig. I rely heavily on the Fourth Estate, so no pressure, Padraig.
There you go.
I will tell you. So here's a
I think he's
journalist story.
departed.
No,
Go
he's
on.
still here. He's still here. Yeah. But Padraig, have you got a responsibility in all this, Padraig? Everybody's pointing the finger at you now as a journalist. Do you want to unmute and tell us that you're going to fly the flag? Or maybe he's on the train and he can't unmute. But
Okay.
anyway, there we go.
So very quick journalist story. Today, I got a note. Some of you will know the Top 1000 Funds, Amanda White. They did a piece on AIMCO, which is the Alberta Investment Management Company, where the non-wise Alberta government fired the whole fiduciary board. They've put Peter Harper in charge as chair. If you remember Peter Harper and climate change in Canada, I met him in India, had an interesting conversation. And I replied to the journalist, copying another one, trying to produce some journalistic competition, that I had a jolly good climate story about Peter Harper, which related to the article. Journalists are a key part of spreading the message, and I will now promote Pillager's article in FT Weekend whenever it's published.
Perfect. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that. Again, there's again some few questions. Let's just get to the end and then we'll come back to the questions.
Yeah, I mean, Steve, I'm really interested in
you're
their
doing
questions.
really well. We've got 7 minutes, but we can overspill a little bit. But
I can overspill.
sorry, I interrupted you, Mike. I
can. What I'm saying is, I want to speak to the attendees' interests, not what I thought yours and mine might be. But keep going.
Indeed. Yeah, no, that's fine. Last couple of bits. So barriers to progress we've not touched upon. What would you say the barriers are at the moment?
Well, can I suggest we have it's the rethinking? It's essentially the rethinking. We are making decisions. Go back to, you know, Copernicus, Galileo, Catholic Church. Go back to Newton, Einstein. Whether it's investors, MPT, insurers, we'll just reprice. Governments believe repricing. Whether it's banking, capital requirements. How do we make capital requirements relate to the goodness of the economic activity? So the barriers are basically rethinking, which is hard because, you know, we've believed MPT. Oh, it's only a theory. So it's a rethinking. Yep.
Okay. And one of the things I wanted to ask you, you mentioned right at the beginning, you had 10 grandchildren, therefore children. What's going on in their world? I mean, you know, what's going on in the 20-year-old, 30-year-old, 40-year-old kids' world? Is this really starting to be round table dinner party conversation, or is there not enough? You know, let's call us the great and the good of the pensions industry. Is there not enough coming out of the pensions industry to waterfall down to the younger generation about, yes, save, but saving the right funds? Is that not happening?
It's, you know, the right funds may not sort of exist, or the right purchases may not exist to purchase the right funds. One of my favourite phrases, them asking us to be good ancestors. Please be good ancestors, because we're making the decisions. We're around the trustee table. Please be good ancestors. We don't quite understand the problem. You do finance. You've been around, your grey hair, Grandpa. You've been around a while. Please be good ancestors.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good answer, to be fair. Really good answer. Which comes nicely on to what final advice would you offer to the attendees? And then we'll go to the questions in the chat.
Which bits of this conversation resonated, and if they can increase your agency tomorrow, please let them, and then increase the agency in your networks, because we have a massive problem we sort of know what to do, but it's hard because we're sort of challenging people's sort of risk theology.
It's a massive change, isn't it? Required.
Yes,
and it's generational change. Yeah.
But Billy's put Billy's advice point is a good one. There is a growing feeling in some part of my network that even the climate scientists are holding back because they don't want to scare the horses. That is scary.
Wow.
The good news is I do lots of crazy. I'm working with the US military. That's probably a conversation of the playpen, but I'm working with the US military. Not all of them share the view of climate change of their new commander-in-chief. But I can't talk too much about that because it's an insurgency.
Well, there we are. Let's not move too far into that direction, but there we go. Appreciate the questions. There's quite a few questions in the chat. So Derek, you're asking about minority of active managers restating their numbers and maybe a change in accounting standards.
Change in accounting. Steve, let's do change in accounting is really important. It's actually the second most important thing, or possibly equal with scenarios. Last April, the IASB board confirmed that if a company had made a net zero commitment, and be careful when an actuary talks accounting, that could lead to a constructive obligation. Under certain conditions, under IAS 37, a constructive obligation, something you promise your stakeholders, requires a provision on your balance sheet, a provision. The good news is that under IAS 38, you can start putting intangibles on your balance sheet financially. So all the good stuff you're doing becomes an asset. Now, one can wonder why the accounting profession at the highest levels globally are trying to avoid this at all costs. One might say it's the Enron ripples, and Derek and I may be having a conversation about this sometime. It is not happening. So investors are not being given the information on intangibles, which the economic activity of a company does. That was, long story short, I've been involved in this for 2 years. We are now pitching to the EU Commission that this is the way to save the omnibus thing that, the EU is doing this omnibus thing. Given the American view of Europe, see 1 or 2 conversations in the last week, this is the way to turn common sense into financial accounting common sense. So, I mean, you'll hear a lot of this from me and others in bits of my network, but accounting, one could argue that accounting has bamboozled capitalism, which, that's quite a it's quite a strong charge. So glad I got that one in. And
well done.
Derek will know more about this than me in one sense, because, well, I assume you're an accountant, Derek. I don't know.
He's just good with numbers.
Coming very quickly, because you've tried to recruit lawyers, you've tried to recruit journalists and trustees. I think you need to recruit the accountants as well. You're quite right to highlight that top table statement last year, but if you go on the website of the largest accounting body in the UK, which is the ICAW, there is a very strong message from them that there are no such things as intangible liabilities. I find it staggering that they can say that without challenge. But that's what.
Well, it's clearly not true, and I can assure you we're working on it, and maybe we can recruit you.
I think you've definitely got to recruit. There's definitely.
Sorry, I'm a member of a different. My institute's based in Edinburgh. I'm a different one. Sorry.
Well, the Scots are always wiser than the English about money.
There you go. Okay. Basically, I mean, there's quite a few questions in there, which obviously we can go through at a later date. But I think it's been a really interesting session, Mike. Okay. The last question I want to ask you, possibly driven by Billy as well, is, he's a humble advisor. What's the message to individual clients? Yeah, I think Billy's got a big smile on his face. Are you confused, Billy? Are clients going to love you or hate you? Are the results going to be higher or lower because you put them into a great ESG fund or a bad ESG fund? What do you think advisors should be doing, Mike, as a last question?
I need to check which domain they're advising in. Is that a financial advisor question?
Yeah, financial advisor. Yeah.
And
I suppose if you're talking about big numbers, like big drawdown numbers, I haven't asked you what your drawdown number was, but average drawdowns are about 250, 300,000. So they're not small pots. Does that money go, and it's the responsibility of the advice, net zero, ESG, environmental or not? And I think advisors possibly need direction, need help.
I think my answer, I hate to say this, but I don't know Eden & Co, so apologies. I'd probably say, find your exco, C-suite, whatever. I will pitch to run a half-day seminar around these topics for a very modest honorarium, and then you work out the answer, because the answer is yours, not mine. How about that?
Sounds good. Are you happy with that, Billy?
Hard. This is hard because my sense is that the business model of Eden & Co is sort of a bit framed by MPT and stewardship's okay. And I go in there and say, diplomatically, I hope, can we work towards a better view of the world, which will then serve your clients? But until you've worked out which bits of this resonate within your business model, you can't do it. It's effectively the same with any group, trustees, lawyers. This is hard. I'm blessed that having worked on it for quite a few years, I'm fairly sort of articulate around risk, financial risk, but societal risk. If you're talking about individuals, the world they're going to. I was on the board of Brunel in LGPS for nearly 4 years, investing for a world worth living in. How does that apply to Eden & Co? Investing, my clients, investing for a world living in. You probably just don't want cheap passive putting money in Exxon without thinking. I mean, there's a whole conversation because one's engaging with a business model that's sort of being challenged. Is that fair?
Yeah, it sounds fair to me. Billy, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, I come at this sort of a slightly different direction. I mean, it's not about, my business model. It's about, the actual, end client. And I think, Steve's right. If you've got, a client and they've got, 3, 4, 500,000, £1 million, and that they're investing, what are the big issues for them? I mean, we haven't got time now, but you made a really interesting point a bit earlier on about passives and actives. And did I get the wrong end of the stick there? Were you suggesting that there's merit in active funds because they can actively manage some of these risks where passives follow the crowd and perhaps they're taking people down a route that they don't know they're going?
That is in part the case. And to keep the conversation going diplomatically, before this conversation gets to your clients, it gets to the mindset of you and your colleagues on your advice. So yes, active, but the challenge is, please think about beta actively. Yeah. It's not just an alpha thing. But because the implications of this, as I say, I do a lot of work with Julia Dreblow, who you probably know. This is hard because active assumes, in a sense, that beta is passive because we accept market returns as a given. This is basically saying, I wish to unpick the risk strands of beta, said the actuary. I want to unpick the risk strands of beta and choose. This is my personal example from my pension pot, which I would not disclose the size of to Steve under any circumstances. Yeah. This is.
I don't want to know.
Good. This is basically a real challenge for the wealth management industry because they are, I would say, some years behind this sort of thinking because it tends to happen with big pension funds first in the UK. So, if I said, how would you advise your clients about an active beta portfolio? You might struggle. So we need a conversation. But that sounds dangerous like a pitch, and I'm not trying to do that.
No, I mean, the answer is, my big clients end up with, good household names like Cazenove and Rathbones and so forth, and it's quite interesting actually looking at their reaction to all of this. But anyway, we haven't got time.
I would actually push hard against that, because you need to go to places. I mean, just have a look at the Cushion website, CUSHON, NAMPOD and NatWest.
Yeah, I know them. Yeah.
They get this. I mean, Julius is great. These conversations, when I was head of fixed income before Big Bang, I got to know Cazenove very well, though it's changed a bit. This is a very difficult conversation if you've done this for a century or two. Yeah. You need to look to the disruptors who are prepared to say our business model is evolving. It hasn't been around long enough. We've been successful. This is, it's with respect, it's a business model thing before it's a client thing.
Okay, I've got that. That's interesting. Yeah.
No, I mean, it's when I'm advising pension funds, I say, don't look at all this voting that the manager's done. Just see how much climate change risk is embedded in the business model of your investment manager, or in fact your investment consultant. You evaluate their ability to absorb strategic climate risk in their business model, because that's what drives what people do. It's your business model. That's what we're doing in insurance with these three scenarios. It's the business model.
Yeah. Okay.
I can stay for as long as there are two people on the
Mike,
screen.
That's fine. I think it's been very, very interesting, and I'm assuming we're going to get lots of lovely virtual claps from people to thank you for your time and thank you for your input. Really good. Cons clapping. So that's always good news. Cons clapping.
I think I regard a con clap in the same way as one might regard a handshake from somebody on the Bake Off.
Well, there we go. That's right. Yeah. Con looks a bit like Paul Hollywood, doesn't he? Really, but there we go. Maybe not. So listen,
I
Mike.
actually confess I've never seen the Bake Off, so I don't know whether that's a compliment or
it is a compliment. A handshake on the Bake Off is a highly regarded accolade.
Oh, okay. It's a good session, Mike. Very good session.
Mike.
Bless you.
If anybody would like to contact Mike afterwards, come to come to me or Henry, and we can obviously, with Mike's blessing, we can release details. But it's been a great session. Thank you so much. The video will be up later on this afternoon, and the podcast. Next week we have, I think she's gone now, but next week Rosalind Connor, the pension lawyer, is going to be talking about sponsorship and covenant for pension funds, and sort of legal spin on covenant reviews, that sort of stuff. So should be an interesting session. But Mike, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. That flew past, which meant it must be good.
Thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate the invitation, because although I did occasionally change Henry's mind on one or two things, I'm not very familiar with Playpen at all.
Oh, well, good. Well, we'll get you back, because there's always lots to talk about, and there'll be another initiative later in the year, or whatever you want. Come back and do another session, because as you say, it can go off in so many different directions.
Be careful. If you think of what you want to do in a fortnight, I'm your man. So be careful.
Brilliant. All right. Well, thank you very much indeed. Enjoy the rest of your day. And thanks for your input, and thanks for your comments, and great to see everyone. Cheers, Billy. Thanks, Peter, and cheers, Mike. All right, take care. Thanks very much. Bye.